I want to take you through a loose floral bouquet that I was painting from mostly my imagination. So, one of the things that I find is also helpful for your practice is to just learn to paint with no image in front of you. So, it forces you to just focus on techniques, brushstrokes, and also whatever colors that you like. So I am painting with watercolor inks, which is one of my favorite ways to paint. These inks are from Dr. Martin PH, and I'm using a cat's tongue brush from Silver Black Velvet. I want you to watch how I hold my brush and how I'm playing with the angle at which I'm holding it, how high up I'm holding it on the handle, because all of these help me to get brushstrokes that are loose, and also I get a lot more movement in my brushstrokes. I love playing with color, so every time the paint is still wet, I would go in and dab in more color, because this is also going to give a little bit more interest to my painting. At this stage of my painting, I am mostly using my brush to create petals. Now, the thing about creating floral petals that you want to remember is that they are not even. In fact, if you think about flowers, sometimes the petals are clumped together or they're overlapping, and so when you are painting, keep that in mind and you can recreate some of it by adding layers, or you can create some overlap in your colors or even change up the color value. So these are ways in which you can play around with how you portray your petals. Now, the thing about watercolor is that it is unpredictable. So sometimes as you are painting, parts of your paper starts to dry up. Now, you will have to decide if you want to work while your paper is wet or while the paper is dry. So often eyeball the areas that you are painting. So this kind of helps you to think about where you want to work on next. Now I'm trying to connect my flowers with a stem to kind of ground it. So I am adding in some of those green stems. And in terms of the layout of these flowers, I am really just playing with my brush. I don't really have a plan at the moment, but what I want to be mindful of is as I'm creating all of these flowers, I'm trying to create them in different directions. So you can see that the one that I'm painting right now is a downward facing flower. The strategy that I like to adopt when it comes to painting flowers is to often vary the size of my petals as I'm painting. And I love to paint from the outside in. So you notice that I'm often pulling towards the center. So always know where the center of your flower is, and then that way work towards connecting your petals towards it so that everything looks a lot more cohesive. Of course, you can have some petals that are coming out or folding outwards away from the center, but most of the petals should meet at the center. The lovely thing about this cat's tongue brush is that you can get really nice thin strokes to create your stems, and then you can also push it down and get some really broad fluffy strokes. Versatility in a brush is so important, and for me I started out with a round brush and then eventually I branched out to playing with other brushes. So playing with your brushes is going to help you to understand how best to use it and maximize it when it comes to creating your fluffy petals as well as your thin strokes, all depending on the pressure that you put on your brush. Now, I do a workshop where I show you how exactly to manipulate your brush, and this is called No Formula Florals. I also recently did a second version where this time we played around with floral perspective and helping you to figure out how best to create flowers that are facing in various directions, because to be honest, the front facing flower is really beautiful and it's probably the flower that most of us start with. But in order to create a composition that is cohesive, you would see that the pattern in bouquets is that all flowers that are not facing us are often around the edges of a bouquet that are facing in various directions. And this is where, when you are painting a bouquet, you got to be mindful of how to paint flowers that are side facing, downward, or even inward facing. So if you are interested in learning more about the workshop, I am going to be putting the link in the description below. I cannot wait to show you what I know. But in the meantime, I am starting to actually work on creating some layers with some of these flowers. And what I mean by layers is I'm trying to create a little bit of depth. When I add on layers, it depends on what kind of effect I want. Sometimes it could be while the paper is still wet, but most times my paper is fully dry and I'm just going in with another layer of paint. Pay attention to the way I wriggle and move my brush around, because this is how I get the various shapes that you can see in my floral petals. I like to really wriggle and move my brush around because I feel like you will not get repetitive strokes. I encourage you to swish your brush in many different directions. Get playful and try and hold it in a slightly higher angle, because this is going to give you so much more movement in your brush strokes. Of course, when you go into details, then you might want to hold your brush closer like what I'm doing right now, because this is going to give you a lot more precision. Now, I find that as I'm building my composition, one of the things that I try and play around with is figuring out the different white spaces in my painting. I often make sure that my flowers are in zigzag fashion, and I vary the size as well as the color value. So you have got some flowers that are larger and some flowers that are smaller next to each other. This way you are going to create some contrast, and the viewer is going to see that there is a sense of distance between the flowers that are bigger, that are obviously closer to them, and then the flowers that are smaller are further behind. I've changed my brush to a small round brush this time, and that's because it gives me a lot more precision and control. So play around with the sizes of your brush as well. If you find that you are having trouble achieving thin strokes, then use a smaller brush, because a lot of the time, smaller brushes also hold less water, which allows you to ensure that you don't create blooms that are unwanted in your painting. Now, the style that I like to do my tutorials is not so much descriptive. I like to share nuggets of insight that you can learn at this portion of the painting. I find that when I just tell you or describe what you're seeing, it really defeats the purpose, because you can already see what's happening. But on the other hand, if I were to share with you insights of what you are actually able to learn from this part of the painting, it is so much more valuable. So share with me in the comments if this style of teaching has been helpful for you, because I want to not just show you how I paint, I also want to tell you what are some of the learning points that you can get from this painting. I often like to cluster or add a lot darker color values and also closer flowers that are towards the center. This is because typically in a bouquet, the things that are closer in the center are a lot darker, more saturated, and then as they bloom or move outwards, you find that they are a lot more spread out, lighter color values, cooler colors, and also smaller in size. So play with all of those elements that you notice in a bouquet, because these are strategies for building compositions. I own a couple of books that are just floral bouquet arrangement, and I find that just by spending time flipping through them while my kids are playing sometimes, it helps me to start to study or notice specific patterns, and I think that this helps to build up your observation skills as well. Now, one of the things that I enjoy doing is creating a center that is a color that is totally different from what I see in the reference photo. I love to use indigo for my center, so this here is indigo that I'm painting in the center of this flower, and then I'm going to go ahead and create more floral centers. After I've painted my flower centers, the next thing I start to do is I start to add a couple of details or layers, and my strategy is to try and differentiate one flower from the other. At the same time, because I love the blends and bleeds that are happening within the painting at the moment, and my paper is completely dry, I don't have any wet spots around, I am just going in and really just adding in darker color values. So when I am using darker color values, the pigment on my brush is often a lot thicker, so this means that the color value is going to be a lot darker, and it's going to draw the viewer to that with the contrast. If you're not sure where to add details, my suggestion is the centers and the edge of the flowers. These are typically where the shadows fall, so use that if you're not sure of where to go with adding your details. With painting loosely, you don't have to add details for every single flower. In fact, I would encourage you to leave some out because it lets the audience get a sense of imagination and also allows them to finish the painting on their own. I am soon going to be finishing up this painting. If you have come this far to the video, I really enjoyed showing you some of the strategies I did with painting this bouquet loosely. Try this out and let me know what you learned from your own experience. I would love to hear from you, whether it's in the comments or look for me on Instagram. All of these contacts can be found in the description below, and I cannot wait to connect with you. And until then, I hope to see you in the next video.